This is a Cuda. It's an armored vehicle based on the 70 series Toyota Land Cruiser, and it can handle just about anything. The Cuda has some amazing quirks and features, as you probably could have guessed, if security and protection is very important to you. And today, I'm going to review the Cuda and show you everything. I've borrowed the Cuda from Alpine Armoring, which is an armored vehicle manufacturer located here in the Washington, D.C. area. This insane Toyota Land Cruiser sits in their showroom. It was hit with over 350 rounds of ammunition, and a bomb was detonated under it to prove its incredible security capabilities. But Alpine Armoring also manufactures purpose-built armored vehicles like the Cuda, which is even more intense. You can check out Alpine Armoring by clicking the link in the description below to head over to their website or their Instagram, where they have some very interesting vehicles. So let's talk Cuda. Like I said, this is based on the 70 series Toyota Land Cruiser, which has been in production in the same basic form since the 1980s. It's also well known and well loved for its reliability and durability. The 70 series is also one of the most versatile vehicles on the planet. It's an SUV or a pickup truck or an ambulance. It's also used as an ice expedition vehicle or an underground mines. But this might just be the most insane 70 series yet. This truck has a 4.5 liter diesel V8 that's made into a manual transmission and four-wheel drive, but of course it has a lot more than that too. It seats 8, it has a public address system and sirens and lights and all sorts of cool armoring stuff, which I will show you. So today I'm going to review the Cuda and show you all of its interesting quirks and features. Then I'll get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'll give it a DOUGSCORE. Alright, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the Cuda by first discussing exactly what this is. I mentioned earlier this is based on the 70 series Toyota Land Cruiser, except Alpine Armoring takes the Land Cruiser body and gets rid of it, and they have their own fully armored body that they drop on top instead. Now, if you're a fan of the 70 series Land Cruiser, you can kind of tell that this is a 70 series underneath. It has the same basic general proportions, the same sort of narrow width, obviously the same wheelbase, but pretty much everything else has been replaced and everything has been armored. This vehicle is fully armored. The hood, the sides, the roof, it's all armored. And I'm going to show you some of the quirkier and interesting armored pieces on this truck. One interesting piece of armoring here is the grille. A combustion engine needs air in order to work properly, but having air gaps is sort of directly at odds with the point of armoring a vehicle. So, in this case, there are louvers in the grille that face downwards. That way, air can still get in the downward-facing louvers, but no one can penetrate this grille with fire unless they're firing from like down here below you, which is a pretty unlikely thing for any situation this vehicle might encounter. So, still armored and yet still gets air through thanks to these angled louvers. And then there's the glass. The Cuda has 10 windows, front, rear, sides, 10 total windows, and each of them are armored with glass that is over 40 millimeters thick. That's 1.5 inches thick in each piece of glass to make sure none of it can be penetrated with live fire. That is pretty amazing. And if you look outside at the glass, you can get an idea of just how thick each window is because they're all covered in this like protective casing that kind of shows their thickness. That's even true of the windshield. You can see it's surrounded in this protective casing. You can see just how thick it is. And of course, all this thickness adds a lot of weight. A normal car windshield weighs maybe 25 pounds. The windshield in this vehicle weighs about 150 pounds because it has so much thickness for armoring to make sure nothing can penetrate the window. And just in case you want to see how thick this glass is, here you go. This is a sample of the thickness of this armored glass. You get an idea, nothing is getting through here. That's pretty cool. But back to the weight for a second. I mentioned the windshield is incredibly heavy, but that's not the only heavy thing. I wish you could feel the doors doors in this vehicle. Unbelievably heavy doors, very, very different from the standard 70 series door because of the armoring on the door itself and of course the massively heavy glass as well. And that's true of every panel in this vehicle. The hood is also unbelievably heavy to open and close. That's just sort of life with an armored vehicle. And by the way, speaking of the doors, this is an interesting aspect of an armored vehicle because the doors have to open. And so by definition, there has to be a gap between the door and the body of the car. So how do you armor this? I've always assumed you can just walk up to an armored vehicle, and if you stick your gun right in the seam between the door and the body, you should be able to fire into the car. But Alpine Armoring has, of course, thought of that. If you open up the door, you can see there's actually armoring behind the door seam. You can see it there. And then, of course, the edge of the door is also armored, just like the entire rest of the door. The interesting trick here is that the gap when the door closes is actually offset. The door closes sort of on top of the additional armoring on the other side of the door seam, and so there's no real gap in the armoring. Unlike a normal car where the door just closes and there's a little gap with the body, here they actually kind of overlap to make sure every single surface is armored, even the seam behind the door opening, so you're protected no matter where fire is coming from. And the cool armored stuff doesn't end there. The door seam thing is pretty neat, but probably my favorite armored piece on this vehicle is the fuel tank. Look underneath right back here and you can see, yes, even the fuel tank is armored, so this thing isn't going to blow up, and so nobody can pierce your fuel tank in case you need to make a getaway while there's an ambush, which is pretty neat. And just in case you're curious exactly how much this armoring can protect you, Alpine Armoring tells me that the Cuda is armored up to a level A9B6, which of course has no meaning to me, but what they explained is that it can take fire from an AR-15 or an AK-47 and none of that stuff will penetrate the cabin. And you can even detonate grenades underneath this vehicle and it will protect the occupants so you don't have to worry about injury in a grenade explosion, which is pretty insane. Now, it's worth noting if that happens, the vehicle might not still run and drive like normal or even at all, because you can't really armor a drive shaft very easily. It's possible, but this vehicle doesn't have it, but it will keep people safe in the occupant compartment so they can be rescued later, and that's pretty impressive. And the armoring goes beyond just the body and the windows of the Cuda. This truck also has specially designed run-flat tires that have sort of a composite material between the tire and the wheel, which can act as a sort of tire in case your tire is punctured. Alpine Armoring told me that these specially designed run-flat tires can take this truck at up to 50 miles an hour for up to 50 minutes after they've been punctured. And crucially, I'm not talking about a puncture like, oh, you got a nail in the tire. I mean, if the tires have been shot out with ammunition, this truck can still go 50 miles an hour for 50 minutes in order to get away, which is obviously a pretty crazy thing. And then, of course, there's the front bumper. You got an armored vehicle with armored windows and armored tires. You gotta have one of these bumpers, this like push-style ram bumper that can run into everything and get it out of the way. You can see it's absolutely massive, and it too is armored and reinforced, so it can really plow into whatever's necessary in order to clear the path to get the occupants of the Cuda to safety. Of course, you can also see the bumper has a winch on it. At the end of the day, this is still a 70 series Land Cruiser, so even though it's a lot heavier and its purpose has changed a little, it's still pretty capable off-road. And if you get stuck off-roading, or if someone else does, you can use the winch to get free. And since I'm up front, another interesting little piece of armoring on the outside of the Cuda, you can see the lights are covered in this little almost mesh looking pattern. Of course, this is actually like armored metal, but it almost looks mesh-like. Now, if you're in the off-roading world, you know what this is. It looks like a brush guard, so if you're driving through forest or trees, whatever, some branch won't come and penetrate this area and smash your light and you have to replace it. That would be annoying. But then you look around to the back side of the Cuda, you'll notice there are also brush guards on the taillights, which doesn't really make any sense. No branch is ever gonna come from behind while you're off-roading and smash out your taillights, so why do they have them back there? That's because these aren't really brush guards at all. Yes, they can be used for that purpose, but they're really intended for use in like a riot situation. You have riot police inside, stuff's getting thrown at the vehicle. These will make sure that the lights aren't penetrated, so you don't have a costly repair. These things keep the headlights from getting hit with flying debris. And speaking of lighting, you will notice as you look around the Cuda that you have these little LED lights mounted pretty much everywhere, front, rear, sides. And when you turn them all on, you will see that they flash in red and blue lighting configuration. That's because this Cuda, it's sort of a display model set up for theoretical law enforcement department use. So the blue and red lights are obviously for law enforcement purposes. If you get a civilian version of this vehicle, these light colors could change. You can set them up in like yellow and white, or you can have them flash in basically any colors that you want. Alpine Armoring can do that. But for law enforcement purposes, you'd have these flashing lights in red and blue, as you can see. And next up, still on the subject of lights, take a look at these lights mounted on the roof. They are absolutely massive. You can see them sitting up there. Those don't flash in red or blue. Instead, they're just there to help you see. There's a cover on them right now, but you pull the cover off, you can light them up on the inside, which I'll show you in a little while, and they are very bright, and then you can see what's in front of you, which could of course be useful if your Cuda is being ambushed at night and you need to see your attacker. And next up, still in terms of lighting, another interesting lighting item around back in the Cuda. You can see several different lights back here. On the top, you have two LED lights. Those are the red and blue strobe lights like I was showing you before. But positioned lower on the sides, you have another pair of LED lights. These are just really bright. They are intended to be blinding in case someone is trying to tail you or follow you. You turn these things on and they really blind somebody and make it more difficult for them to do that. Alternatively, you can also use these lights to just simply help you back up. Since this vehicle is so huge, visibility can be a little bit tricky, and so turning these on, you can see a little bit better behind you. But that's the theory with these lights in back. And next up, another cool item on this truck. I like the fact that everything about this vehicle is just more heavy duty than a regular car. One good example of that out here is the hinges for the doors. You can see very heavy duty, massive exposed hinges designed to be incredibly difficult to penetrate or break with any sort of ammunition. You can see these hinges in several different places. You have similar hinges on the hood right here at the base of the windshield, and these look pretty cool in addition to being very heavy duty. And you even have these heavy duty hinges on the fuel door to insert fuel, because I guess you don't really want that to be penetrated either. And it's just kind of a cool look that ties it into the rest of the vehicle. And speaking of heavy duty stuff, how about this mirror? This is not a standard 70 series Toyota Land Cruiser mirror. It is huge, and in fact it's borrowed from a heavy duty Chevy Silverado pickup truck. It's like the giant full-size towing mirror that truck offers, now included here just for extra help with visibility and for its heavy dutiness. And next up, another interesting item on the outside of this truck, you will notice a lot of handles out here. You look on the side, you can see this one on the door, and then there's another one next to that, and then this giant handle goes the entire rear side of the truck, and there's also a massive handle on the top, on the roof, mounted on the side. And all these handles are obviously repeated again on the other side. There is a reason for all these handles on the outside. Alpine Armoring says they're here for the crew deployment position. Think about it this way. Let's say you're going to some site and you need to get everybody out of the vehicle quickly. If you have a full vehicle, they can all go out the rear door, but that's a bit cumbersome. Instead, you can mount everybody sort of standing on the side of the vehicle and holding on to the railings. And then when you show up somewhere, everybody can jump off and start doing whatever tactical things they need to do. And so for that reason, the Cuda also has these massive running boards going along the side. You can see here. Obviously, it helps you get in the front door and climb up, but the running board then continues down the side mounted next to these handles, so you can stand on the running board and ride alongside the Cuda if you have to, in order to deploy quickly when you get where you're going. You can see the running board even extends back here behind the rear wheel, so that someone could even theoretically ride back here. You can get as many people as possible riding on the outside of the Cuda for the crew deployment position. But when it comes to the Cuda, the safest place to be is inside side, since the entire vehicle is armored. So let's talk over what happens when your security team is riding on the inside of the Cuda. For one thing, you can see seats back here. These seats are mounted directly in the center facing out, and there are 6 of them. 6 different seats back here, plus 2 more up front. So this can carry 8 people with seat belts, although you could probably jam in a few more if you really wanted to. Now, this isn't the only seating configuration available in the Cuda. Alpine Armoring says you can also get it equipped with inward-facing bench seats. They're mounted on the sides facing in. But the benefit of this is that each person sitting in back can look out an individual window here. You can see 3 windows on each side, 3 on the driver's side, 3 on the passenger side, corresponding to 3 seats in the center looking out. And directly below each window, you have a gun port. Yes, that's right. You open up this little door, which of course is armored, and you can see it's a hole where you could stick a gun through in order to return fire if necessary. Now, Alpine Armoring tells me you don't really want to use these gun ports because it's incredibly loud inside this small vehicle. If any firearm is fired, let alone 6 at once, it would really be a disaster. And plus, you don't have amazing visibility through these little windows. But the gun ports are here just in case you're taking on fire from some ambush and you have to return it. It is possible through those ports. And speaking of those gun ports, you have 2 more mounted on the rear door. You can see 1 on each side. You can pop these open and again use this as a gun port in case you absolutely have to. If you were getting ambushed, you can shoot out in back and not just side to side. And speaking of the rear door, look back here and you will notice this metal piece with like a red clip at the end. This is what Alpine Armoring calls a battle lock. This vehicle has locking, like regular cars have a locking door, but just in case you're in some crazy difficult situation, you don't trust regular locks, you can use this battle lock and you can see just how thick it is to lock this door. And that way, nobody is getting in. Nobody's ever going to get through that battle lock in case you really need a serious locking situation. Also worth noting, in the back of the Cuda, you can see the rearmost 2 seats back here are a little larger than the rest of the seats. They fold up, they look larger and a little bit more comfortable, and that's because that's sort of the hub of the rear of this vehicle, if you will. There's a few reasons for that. Number one, it's obviously just easier to get into the rearmost seats, but it's not just that. If you're sitting in the furthest back position, you can not only look out side to side, but also look out to the rear. So passengers sitting in back have just a little bit more command of the situation if they're sitting in the rearmost seats. As a result, if you're driving around in the Cuda using it for protection and you don't have a full team of 8 and you just have 2 who are going to ride in the back, these are the seats they would choose. They're sort of the prime seats that give you the best view and make it easiest to climb in and out of the Cuda. And next we move on to the front seats in the Cuda, where the first thing you notice in here is a regular 70 series Land Cruiser dashboard. You can see here, this isn't really all that altered from a modern 70 series truck, and it's kind of interesting to see it with all this custom stuff and armored stuff in back. The dashboard remains relatively similar. In fact, that's one of the few carryover items from a 70 series. Another one is the engine, which I'll get to in a little bit, but for now, in the interior, you can see a fairly standard 70 series dashboard. But there's a lot more in this interior than just that. I'm going to start with this center console, a massive console with all sorts of different controls for some of the auxiliary features that this truck has. My personal favorite is the PA system. You can see here this little microphone mounted to the side of this console. You can turn it on using this little dial and then you can speak through it. So if you want to tell people to disperse or stop ambushing us, you can do that using the microphone here in the car. And the speaker for this microphone is located somewhere like near the driver's footwell inside the engine bay, so it too is armored. That means in an ambush, you will have to listen to the people inside the vehicle say whatever they want, since you won't be able to penetrate that speaker.
Hello, ambushers. Let me tell you about my quirks and features.
Now, the other thing about this PA system, you can also use it as a siren. You can see there are several different siren options here. This little dial can cycle through several different choices you have. And of course, that's a lot of fun to play with. So take a listen to me for just a few seconds messing with the siren in the Cuda. Now, the next interesting thing in this center console control area, you can see to the right of the PA system, you have 2 switches. These switches will turn on your giant overhead lights, which I had mentioned before. That's not all that unusual. You can use them to see, like I said. The cool part is these remote controls. You can see these little remotes here with arrows on this pad. You can use these remotes to move the direction of these lights. So you can adjust where they're pointing, up, down, side to side, and you can light up whatever it is that you want to see, which is pretty cool. You can do it all remote from inside the interior if you need more lighting on the outside. Next up, above those lower controls, the next tier, you have one marked fog. That would be your fog lights up front. You also have one marked high intensity, which are those white lights in back I mentioned earlier that can help blind people if they're trying to follow you. You turn those on by pressing high intensity. And you also have your power mirror controls, just your standard 70 series mirror controls, nothing unusual there. Next up, the next tier is your strobe lights. These turn on the blue and red lights that I had shown you before, front, rear, side, or all of them on at once. You can turn them all on using these strobe light controls here. That's also pretty standard. Finally, your last group of controls, the very top of the center console, you have one that says battery kill. That's your battery kill switch, of course. If you plan to store this, not use it for a long time, you don't want the battery to go flat, you just press that, turns off the battery until the next time you want to get inside. More interesting than that control, though, is one marked stealth. If you press that, it turns off all exterior lighting for the vehicle. And not just the LED lights and the strobe lights, but even like the factory headlights and taillights, they all go off if you press stealth. So you can cruise in complete darkness in this thing if you need to have a full stealth mode. Now, one other interesting addition to this interior, in the center console, you can see here, there's a screen. And that screen projects images from a camera system mounted in back. As you can imagine, the rear view mirror is not particularly useful in this vehicle because you have a whole security team riding behind you. You're not really going to be able to see out of this mirror. And so one image that this screen can show is a rear view mirror camera. And you can see right here, it's showing what's going on behind you a lot better than your mirror can. You can see the camera is mounted up here near the top of the rear end, and that's what's showing you what's going on behind you while you're cruising. You also have an option for a second angle. You can switch instead to this camera angle, which is more of like a reversing camera that shows what's directly behind you if you want to back up. And you can see that camera is mounted down here pretty low to make it easier to see directly what's like in your path if you're backing up so you don't crush anything. Now, one other thing you'll also notice in the center control stack area is climate controls here, which are very important for this vehicle. You have heating and air conditioning, and I mentioned they're important because the windows don't roll down. Armored windows, because they're so thick, there's no real place for them to roll down into a door, which is also armored. There's plating there. You can't roll down the windows in an armored vehicle. And so you need climate control and air, and that comes from the climate control system that comes with the vehicle. It's very, very important to have heating and air conditioning in an armored car, since otherwise you'll just be sweating in here on a hot day with no ability to roll down the windows at all, and also all this thick armor all around you, which probably makes it even hotter, frankly. So next up, and finally, you're probably wondering who exactly buys this vehicle? What exactly is the market for the Cuda? And there are several different explanations. It could be personal security, but probably more likely to be law enforcement or like riot control, obviously in foreign markets. This is intended to be sold in markets where the Toyota Land Cruiser is still the king. Think Latin America or maybe the Middle East or Africa. Two other questions you might be wondering. One, what does this cost? Alpine Armoring tells me about $185,000 as it's equipped. Armoring a vehicle is pretty expensive. You also might be wondering, why isn't there like a hatch coming out the roof? You can pop it open and then climb up and you have a good position overlooking everything that's going on so you can see all around you. It's an interesting answer. Alpine Armoring told me when you start getting into including hatches on vehicles like this, then the US government asks a lot more questions when you want to export it, because then it's treated like almost a military vehicle. A roof hatch, like a machine gun turret point, almost seems militaristic. And Alpine Armoring says they can do it and they can export them, but a lot more paperwork is involved at the State Department to make sure these don't fall into the wrong hands. In this configuration, less military, more law enforcement or private ownership, and so it's not quite as heavily scrutinized, which makes sense. And finally, we move under the hood in the Cuda, where you can see the engine. This is a 4.5 liter turbo diesel V8, and this is pretty much just a stock stock factory Toyota Land Cruiser 70 series powertrain. Toyota is known for its reliable, durable, low-stress diesel engines, and this is one of them. Not really updated, not really necessary to be updated, although I'm curious to see how it performs with all the added weight of all this armoring stuff for the Cuda. Driving that home point with all the added weight is the hood, which obviously is armored itself and is incredibly heavy. You can see it looks heavy, and it is heavy. Raising it or lowering it, kind of a chore, just like basically all the other opening pieces on this car. Very heavy. And so those are the quirks and features of the Cuda, a thoroughly crazy armored vehicle. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the Cuda. Now this is cool for two reasons for me. One is because obviously this is like a crazy armored vehicle that's so insane, but also because I'm driving a relatively modern 70 series Land Cruiser here in the United States, which is something that pretty much nobody gets to do. This vehicle was imported here under a temporary import bond, meaning it was imported for a brief period so that Alpine Armoring could upfit it, armor it, and then it has to be exported when they sell it. It cannot be sold to any agency or person in the United States. It has to go overseas. But while it's here, they can drive it, use it for testing purposes, that sort of thing, and that's what we're doing here. So, a few things I want to mention. First off, 4.5 liter diesel V8. Like I said, that's a pretty bulky powertrain, and it's a strong one. And in this vehicle, it feels pretty good. It's a smooth diesel, and I was a little anxious about how it was going to propel this truck with all this armor on it, and the answer is it actually does just fine. You know, it's got a lot of torque. And these things were never intended to be fast. I mean, it's not a quick powertrain. It doesn't provide a zillion horsepower. That's not really the point of this vehicle. Instead, you get this down low torque. And so this motor is kind of designed for propelling heavy loads because of that. And so it actually feels just fine. It feels right at home for this vehicle. In fact, this is sort of the perfect engine. It's totally fast enough. I also just love the sound of that kind of old school diesel rumble that this truck has. It feels like the old school truck that it is. That's kind of the charm of the 70 series. It's this old 80s era truck, and it's not modern and it's not nice, but that's the benefit of it. It just sort of has lived on durably and reliably for years and years. Now, sitting in here, the whole armored thing, one interesting thing that I realized relatively quickly is that visibility comes, you get a bit of a hit in terms of visibility because the windows have to be small in order for them to fit and then have the frame fit around them, and because they're so massive. And also, you just obviously want that bulky armor on the pillars, on the sides, everywhere you can. The less window, the better in terms of armoring. I mean, the window holds up to fire just like the body does, but obviously you can see through a window, you can see your target, whatever. It's just better to have armored body. And so you have a lot of armored body, and you can't really see all that well. The A-pillar especially is absolutely massive. You can hide entire vehicles, people, anything in there. So you have to really kind of be on the lookout when you're driving to know exactly what's around you at all times. Now, like the 70 series reputation, this truck is cool in the sense that it's like upright, simple, easy to drive. You get a simple gauge cluster, an easy driving experience. There's not all that much to it. It's just sort of a torquey, low-end diesel powertrain. You do feel the weight of this truck, but it's not excessive. I'm actually a little bit surprised by that. It just sort of feels fine. It doesn't feel as dramatically heavy or top-heavy or anything like that as I thought it would be. And even going around corners, it doesn't really have an enormous weightiness to it that I thought it would have. Now, it does feel relatively heavy and relatively sort of topsy-turvy body rolly, but I suspect a regular 70 series already does as well because it's so narrow track and it's relatively tall. SUVs aren't built like the 70 series anymore. Generally speaking, though, I gotta say, this is a pretty cool truck. Driving it along, you look out of this hood, you feel like you're in something, which of course you are. It drives reasonably well. The only real drawback is it's just so obvious what it is, but you're protected, so even if someone tries to ambush you, you're just cruising around in the world's most armored 70 series. And so that's the Cuda, a thoroughly armored vehicle based on the 70 series Toyota Land Cruiser. If you don't feel safe in a normal vehicle, or even a normal armored vehicle, this might just be the vehicle for you and your team of bodyguards. Anyway, now it's time to give the Cuda a DOUGSCORE. And the Doug score is here, 45 out of 100, and here's how the Cuda stacks up against other crazy SUVs and trucks I've reviewed. The Cuda isn't beautiful or especially thrilling to drive, but it's exciting in a totally different way, as a purpose-built machine that can safely get you through basically any difficult situation. The fact that it's based on a 70 series Toyota Land Cruiser makes it even cooler, since that truck has an amazing reputation for also getting you through basically any situation. And if you need the ultimate, well, that's the Cuda.